Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Building Better Brains. So today I want to talk about if you feel like you're walking on eggshells around your child, if they are hyperreactive, oversensitive, explosive, whatever the case may be. For some kids, it's like meltdowns, like they're crying. For some kids, it's explosive rage. For some kids, it's just they don't transition well, and they just can't get over it. It's not like an all-out explosion, but they just get stuck on something with that kind of perseverance. So what I want to tell you about is a boy I started working with. His name was Brady, and he would go from 0 to 360 super easily. He was about I think he was 8 years old when I started working with him. And his parents had tried a lot of the typical tricks of the trade and so forth. They really didn't want to medicate, but they had tried just about everything else. And Mom even confided in me that she was actually worried Brady was going to end up in jail if he continued, because she said he doesn't have any friends. No one wants to play with him. And she really wanted to do my program, and she had heard about these cognitive exercises and so forth, but she said, I don't know how I'm going to get him to comply because he just is so easily set off and so forth. So what I suggested to her was that we start with rhythmic movements, and that's something I've learned more recently. And it's a really good buy-in and a really good way to help calm down the central nervous system, to help get kids out of fight or flight for those kids who are super hyperreactive, whether it's, a diagnosis of more serious ADHD or ODD or whatever. So rhythmic movement is a type of exercise, and I call it that because it's not really an exercise. In fact, when we start off, it's actually something the parents are doing to the child, and it's different. Like one example is like kind of rocking them, and obviously there's more to it than that, but it stimulates different areas of the brain and so forth. So it wasn't completely developed by Dr. Harold Blomberg, who's kind of considered the grandfather of it. He learned it from another person, Kirsten Lintz, but he really built it up and worked from what it was in its very simple infancy version. And what happened was he went to visit this colleague, and he was fascinated by the success of what he was seeing with his clients' patients. Everything from kids with severe motor delays, cognitive impairments, whether it was adults, kids, autism, and so forth, really making significant improvement with these rhythmic movements. And when he started researching it, because he really wanted to understand what was going on in the brain and what's happening, that this is really helping to calm down these types of clients and patients who are so easily agitated and so forth, is he realized that that babies do these spontaneous rhythmic movements. They actually even do them in the womb, and the movements actually help to integrate retained primitive reflexes, which I've talked about quite a bit and are at the core of many learning and behavioral difficulties, right? I talked about that recent study where all of the kids, and there was thousands in this study, were found to have retained primitive reflexes, and all of them had, ADHD or learning disability and so forth. And so, these retained reflexes, as I've said before, need to be integrated. If they are not integrated, then they are going to cause motor deficits, or difficulty with motor skills, visual motor skills, visual processing, learning, speech, communication, emotional regulation, and on and on and on we go. So what he started doing was using it with everything from clients or patients, I should say, with ADHD to autism spectrum and even schizophrenia. And I'm not going to go that far, and he's not in any way suggesting that, people were cured of schizophrenia from this, but it really helped to calm them down. And the results with people who had less severe difficulties made absolutely amazing improvements. So they are really a very simple, gentle set of movements. They're not they're not going to trigger anything in kids. So they're very, very safe. And as I said, they really help if you have a kid who's non-compliant, to help get them settled and so forth. And basically what it does is it helps to improve the reactivity in the brain. And it helps as well with kids who have anxiety and so forth. So what these movements do, whether they're simulated and we're doing them in clinic or at home because the child didn't get those rhythmic movements or something was off in brain development, or whether they're the rhythmic movements that babies naturally do, Either way, what these rhythmic movements do is they help to link up the different parts of the brain and connect them. And there's certain parts of the brain that really need to be linked up and connected well together. Okay, it's kind of like all it takes is one piece of a computer for the wiring not to be plugged in and nothing is going to work. And so it's the cerebellum, the basal ganglia, the brainstem, the cortex, right? That's where all of the executive functioning happens, like planning, reasoning, impulse control, emotional regulation, all of that type of stuff. So these movements help to create new neurons, to create branches between these new neurons, and even to help myelinate the nerves. And that's really important, right? Myelination of the nerves is that covering, kind of like literally the plastic covering over an electrical wire. Very, very important. And so these rhythmic movements are something that like babies do in the womb. And then it just continues on as they're, when they're babies. And then those movements are actually what helps them integrate those primitive reflexes and then be able to, and also assist them in being able to learn how to creep and crawl and roll over and walk and all of that type of stuff. So in a nutshell, rhythmic movements help to develop nerve nets and neurons in the brain, and really key, connects to the cortex, right? That's what's off with these kids. They have poor executive functioning, poor impulse control, because they have poor connection. They have poor activity, if you will, in the cortex, and there's so much going on in the lower brain levels. And so stimulating these senses is really, really important for learning. And so just to kind of give a little back information on the brain, 90% of the brain is developed by the age of 5 years old. And this occurs through sensory motor stimulation and movement. And it's through three different senses that this mainly occurs through. And that's number one, proprioception. So it's like movement, the joints, the ligaments, the nerves, the tendons, all of that type of stuff. And that whole process, which really has a lot to do with the cerebellum, where learning also occurs. That's the first area. And then there's the vestibular system, which we think of just as balance, but has to do with auditory processing and inner ear function and all of that type of stuff. And then the last one is tactile, and that's just like pressure and touch and so forth. So those three components are really what helps to develop the brain and these neurons and so forth. And rhythmic movement is what stimulates and develops these areas, the cortex and the cerebellum and all of that type of stuff. So really, really, really important. As I've said before, the cerebellum is very much tied to movement and learning. And that is why we cannot separate movement from learning, because learning and movement occur in the same place in the brain. That's the cerebellum. And they have to, movement has to occur. That sensory motor development has to occur in order for good learning to occur. So basically, if we want good development, we need to either we either need to get it early on and make sure kids are getting that movement, and there's all kinds of reasons why they may not, or we need to work on simulating that. And so if a child misses those movements, there's going to be delays. And once we start working on simulating that, we're going to calm the nervous system down. We're going to improve connectivity in the brain. And this is basically going to facilitate easy access to the cortex, right? Which is what happens with these kids. It's not that their cortex isn't working at all, but accessing it is a real struggle for them. It's not something that's occurring by default. So the key is to imitate, simulate these movements. That's what we did with Brady. And lo and behold, he was a much calmer, less reactive kid, and even started asking for the rhythmic movements. He was literally asking for mom to do it because he found them so calming and relaxing. And this is not the kid that you would think would be asking for these rhythmic movements. And obviously, in my 6-month program, we do a lot more than just these rhythmic movements. There's brain balancing, primitive reflex integration. We're looking at nutrition, gut healing, detoxification, cerebellum work, which comes later on, and so forth. So we really want to be addressing all of that. So if you're interested in knowing more, first of all, grab my free starter kit if you haven't done that, because there is some movements in there that can get you started and some nutrition tips. And if you're interested in knowing more about the program itself, book a free clarity call to find out more about the full potential formula. It is on promo. This week is the last week it's on promo. It's $1,000 off right now. So now is the time to try and to get in and so forth. So I'll post the links for all of that info in the comments below. And thanks for watching, everyone.